That's right. What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. As always, I'm AJ Malillo.
And I'm Stephen Rambolo.
And you can catch out all of the catch up and check out. I just mixed up those two, but you could do both of those things for all of the Jersey First TV content on our YouTube page by hitting the subscribe button, hitting that little notification bell. You could check out the Nader Narrative and Real Talk with Fernando and Bridging the Gap. You can also check us out on jerseyfirst.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and sign that Jersey First pledge. And of course, you can always check us out on NJ on demand anytime. What is up, Steven? I got through that difficult. This is tough. This is going to be a tough week. You can't tell. You can't tell. It's been a long week for me. And week 3 of law school, back at it, back in the books. English is hard. What's up, Steve?
Yeah. You know what? It might be week 3 of law school. But I'm similarly, feeling frazzled. A lot of big decisions on my mind because it might be week 3 for law school. It is, however, week 1 for football. So I'm sitting here trying to decide which of these Aaron Rodgers jerseys I should wear, whether I go OG Packers or blackout New York Jets. All jokes aside, I just wanted to make a fun little commentary about football starting up. Very excited, very happy to see Aaron Rodgers take the field, regardless of the uniform that he wears. I just love watching that guy play football, and I think it's so special that I get to see him do it for a hometown team, one that I've traditionally not supported and or paid much attention to, that has, however, captured my attention. So, part-time Jets fan this year.
I'm also very excited for Aaron Rodgers to suit up this Monday, September 11th, for the New York Jets, but mostly because I'm quite the large Jet fan. So,
yeah,
obviously, this is huge. This is huge. Big news. Truly remarkable. This might be the greatest moment of my Jets fandom, and he hasn't even taken a snap yet. So,
almost certainly. But aside from the football talk, it's been a decent week. School, again, ramping up, getting way more into it. Definitely feeling at home here, which is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting to happen so soon. And when I say at home here, I mean at home in the actual study of law and everything that it involves. It feels... Every day I leave class and I'm like, granted, it's like fractionally more, certain that this is where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I'm really leaning into that. Definitely getting a little challenging. I definitely, anticipating some quizzes coming up, first assessments, which I think is a really nervy time for anybody getting back into school. Like if you're a student, this is your first time going into college and you're getting hit with your first college quiz, you're probably like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Or even if you've done it before, it's just that first initial, you got a new set of professors, you learn a new material, you don't really know how you're standing up to the task ahead of you until you have some sort of an assessment. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping that it, allows me an opportunity to kind of showcase that I not only deserve to be here, but am quite competitive academically in this forum. So that's about all I've been concerned with, really, is just staying ahead of my work and getting ready to watch Aaron Rodgers play football. Those have been the two biggest, most important things going on in my life at the moment.
Yeah, that's fair. I can't say that I'm very far off from you. I got a big competition coming up in a couple of weeks, couple of months, 2 months, but feels like it's going to come up a lot sooner than that. So I'm really starting prepping for that, and that's been a bit of a struggle, I'll say. But other than that, it's football season is around the corner, and I can't wait. And I cannot wait for the NFL to start again. But this isn't a sports podcast, Steven. This isn't a sports podcast, unfortunately.
No. We do discuss matters of politics, law, and the news, and it's going to bother me the whole time, so I just have to address it off the rip. The diploma in the back is crooked. It is. I've tried so many times to fix it. It's. I think it's an issue with the way that the glass sits and holds it, because I could position it. The minute that it gets hung up and the forces of gravity are able to affect the position of that paper, they just yank it down.
You're
So
gonna have
I
to like
promise.
glue the paper to the back.
Yeah. I want to avoid that, but I think that's what it's going to come down to. Point is, although it may be crooked, it is very valid. I worked very hard and I earned that. So keep it to yourself.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Get out of the comments. All right.
Yeah. Stay out of there.
But you're right. We have this show full of the law and the politics and New Jersey. So let's get into that. And I think this first story is it's quite an important one, and I'm sure most people remember when this was first breaking, but I'll get into it. So the DOJ has found that poor care at New Jersey state-run veterans homes during the pandemic violated the Constitution. And I'm sure you remember that during the Trump administration, the DOJ decided to investigate issues on how these military and veteran nursing homes or care facilities were functioning during the COVID-19 pandemic, because there was a lot of scrutiny on how the Murphy administration and these government-run facilities were handling things. The two veteran homes in questions were Menlo Park and Paramus, and basically the agencies, the DOJ, said that they were in fact in violation of the U.S. Constitution because they failed to provide the care required and subjected their residents to an unacceptable condition, including adequate infection control and deficient medical care. Now, when this investigation first started in October of 2020, the governor's office suggested that it was a politically motivated hit by the Trump administration. But the DOJ continued to investigate it once the Biden administration came in, and it culminated on a report that came out Thursday, the day we're recording this, which said that the agencies noted the U.S. Attorney General may initiate a lawsuit if state officials have not satisfactorily addressed our concerns. So basically, this quote-unquote politically motivated search came out to find that New Jersey was violating the Constitution. They also investigated nursing homes in New York, but no similar findings have come out to this point. But just for some reference points, this investigation kind of goes into detail about what was going on. And I think the most striking stuff they talk about happened right in the beginning of the pandemic. COVID officially arrived at the veterans' homes in late March, the report says. Menlo Park sent 2 residents to the hospital on March 28th and 29th of 2020. By March 31st of 2020, both had tested positive for COVID. One of those residents died in the hospital on March 31st. The other returned to Menlo Park and died in early April. The leader of the Veterans Healthcare Services notified his supervisor on March 31st that on March 31st of the death the next day. So sorry. The leader of the Veterans Healthcare Services notified his supervisor of that first death on April 1st. And in the reporting, the cause of death was listed as pneumonia, and the writing said that the facility had 0 deaths that were COVID related. By April 12th, 2020, 25 more Menlo Park residents had died. 13 of those 25 residents had tested positive for COVID. The resident population, which was approximately 300 before COVID began, dropped dramatically within the next month. And by April 25th, 2020, 63 more residents had died of numerous recorded causes. And Menlo Park's total census was 205 residents. So it dropped by 95 residents over the next month or so. And we already know that they didn't report the first death properly, so how many of the other deaths were reported incorrectly? The other place was Paramus, and a resident in the Valor unit, one of the facility's 6 active residence units, at the time went to the hospital on March 22nd and tested positive for COVID on March 28th. That resident returned to the facility's Valor unit on hospice care on March 31st and died on April 27th. Meanwhile, as of March 31st, 6 Paramus residents had tested positive for COVID, and 1 died that day of the virus. The leader of the Veterans Healthcare Services reported on March 31st COVID death to his supervisor, writing the residents had died with COVID-19, not because of COVID-19. By April 3rd, there had been 3 COVID resident deaths and 4 employees tested positive for COVID. On March 31st to April 25th, 84 Paramus residents died. The facility recorded 51 of those deaths as COVID or probable COVID deaths. So basically, right at the beginning, they were taking COVID positive patients that they know they tested positive for COVID out of hospitals, bringing them back into these veterans care facilities that most of these veterans are retired elder veterans that are here because they are guaranteed by the government under the 14th Amendment to be adequately cared for in these facilities. And yet, still, these facilities were not reporting properly. They were putting people at risk. They were putting staff at risk, as the article in Politico goes on to say that the staffing protocols were completely backwards, as not even the staff in March of 2020 were allowed to wear a mask, even though the whole point as to why Dr. Fauci at the time was telling the regular population to not wear masks was for exactly the healthcare workers to wear the masks that then they weren't allowed to wear at work. So basically, the Murphy administration goes on to fire the people in charge of these facilities. New supervisors come in, and nothing changed. Nothing changed at all. So we'll see if the Attorney General of the United States does decide to go further with these charges against his political ally, because I think then is when we'll see the actual political motivation behind this. Not the investigation under the Trump DOJ, but the lack of any accountability if the Biden administration doesn't do anything here. Because I think there's a clear-cut violation of the Constitution. People should be held responsible for the deaths that are on their hands.
I agree with that entirely. I have a few thoughts about this. And I think it's probably appropriate to start with what I think is a really interesting distinction. If you recall, when these deaths were happening in hospitals generally, not just veteran care facilities, it was coming out that the reporting of these deaths was almost inverse, or the reverse, where it was people are dying of a heart attack, but they happen to have COVID. So the hospitals are saying, no, they died of COVID, so they could get all this federal money that was coming out, right? I think it's interesting when you look at the situation here, where they are having people who are in that category that we know is susceptible to the extreme effects of COVID. These elderly people that live in these communities that have weakened immune systems that need this extra standard of care. They have COVID, and then they get sent back, and when they die, it's not COVID. So I think that's just an interesting, almost juxtaposition of the way that reporting was working on these deaths in these separate facilities. And I think it goes on to, at least in my opinion, affirm a much larger and longer standing narrative in this country, which is that we do such a poor job at taking care of our veterans in this country. And anybody who is afraid to admit that, or who is afraid to say that, I think is a complete coward and does not look at the facts at hand. And we have a history of doing this. And I think it is such a disservice, and it really degrades the valor that these men and women displayed for our country. Whether or not you agree with the objectives and procedures and actions of the military, it is a complete aside. Point is, these people took a certain risk, they took certain responsibilities, and their government promised to them in return for that a certain standard of care, which is exactly what you mentioned. And they are guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. And yet again, we fall short. That to me is in and of itself worthy of this case being, prosecuted. I think that the attorney general should 1,000% attempt to make an example out of the failure of these New Jersey facilities and their regard for, caring for veterans, because something has to be done. Somebody has to acknowledge this, and it's no secret. I have close friends of mine who are veterans and talk about the horrors that is dealing with the VA and getting your medical needs met through the VA. And they say oftentimes they have an easier time going to a regular doctor and not using the one that the VA, approves or requires of them to get their benefits. And it is just so sad that this feels like a systemic problem with the way that we treat veterans in Veterans Affairs. And I think another interesting thing is when you talk about the way that they were categorizing these deaths, where it almost seems like a cop-out for them to say, oh, well, this person died with COVID, not because of COVID. I feel like when we get into the semantics and as this progresses, if they decide to take up this case, that's going to be a big area of interest where it's like, why you kind of acknowledge that it existed. You acknowledge that they had it. How are you to say one way or the other that this wasn't the cause of death? That we're misreporting and misrepresenting these things.
I would also just point out that like when this was going on, it was March of 2020. It was right in the beginning. It was that first strain of COVID that nobody really knew what was going on, and it was hitting the most vulnerable people in these veterans' homes, right? So it's like it's not like this is a college in New Jersey that is sort of maybe dropping the ball on these protocols. It's literally a place that you are at your most vulnerable that is dropping the ball here. And that's what makes it so startling at the time. And now, Steve, look, I don't want to make this a even broader a discussion, but it just goes to show another thing where it's just another place where the government continues to fail. Just continues to fail. You trust them to take care of the people that literally risked their lives for that very government, and they can't do that. And then they turn around, especially the government of New Jersey, and they say, give us more power, give us more responsibility, put us in charge of more things for them to do what? Where's the return on the investment? Like you mentioned, the VA is terrible. These veterans facilities are terrible. But then they turn around and say, but we should have universal health care that is paid for and functions through the government. And it's like, you can't even do it for our veterans. What makes you say that you could do it for everybody?
I have nothing in the way of a rebuttal on that. I agree. And I think I recall you saying this at the beginning of COVID, but it's one of those situations where, sort of you give them an inch, they take a mile. And it'll be interesting to see as these things progress. And you mentioned this investigation started in what year? 2021?
The investigation started in 2020.
2020, right? So we are 3 years worth of investigation and running numbers and fact finding, all of these things, right? And this is just the first. This is just New Jersey, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see, and maybe we'll have more of a selection of things to compare to. What similar things happened in other states? Where were these other states succeeding in their efforts to, provide healthcare to veterans specifically for this case, but the population at large with regard to reporting and all these things, and where did these other ones lack? And is there consistencies that we could point out and say, hey, you know what, let's turn this into a learning moment, let's make an example out of some of these people and say, hey, you guys got this right, you got this wrong, don't be like them, don't be like the New Jersey veterans home care facilities that did not adequately provide for their residents, that covered up COVID deaths as not COVID deaths for whatever reason, that failed to meet the obligation that they accepted in terms of delivering care unto, a very vulnerable group of individuals. Don't be like them. Be better. I think my final point on it is it's such a shame. And this state, New Jersey, we have a lot to be proud of. We have plenty of successes. We are great at many things. But this is an absolute disgrace. It is an absolute failure, and we have done wrong by a very important part of our population, veterans, and it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, and I couldn't have said it any better myself. And all I want to point out is let's just put our way back machines on, our little time machine hats, and remember the people that were praised as the darlings of COVID and doing and leading us through the right way. It was Governor Cuomo and Governor Murphy and Governor what Newsom out in California, right? These were the people. And where are these stories coming out from? All of those darlings of our media. They weren't checking them then. Now 3 years later they get these reality checks on everybody.
Well, and let's not forget that New York had a major problem where they were actively not reporting deaths. Even in New Jersey, these nursing homes, not specifically for veterans, but nursing homes in these states, were underreporting deaths. They find out months later that so many more people died under the care of these facilities than was initially reported.
Because why?
So,
Because they were sending them back, and then they weren't reporting. And then the media turns around and they say who's the devils and who's the angels of this. Ron DeSantis and Governor Scott, or right, Scott down in Florida, or down in Texas, are the devils of COVID, and Governors Murphy and Cuomo are the saints. But it seems like to me 3 years later it's the inverse.
I'll say this. When all of these issues were occurring, right, in 2020, height of the pandemic, and we didn't know that these numbers were being fluffed or hidden or, not reported correctly, um, it was a different story, completely different story. But like you said, we're 3 years removed from that reality. We have so many more facts. We have conclusive evidence and proof of these things. I'll say this. I agree with you. I think that the media did get it wrong. I think that the general consensus around things was wrong, and we should maybe take a look back at the successes and failures a little more objectively and remove the lens of politics. I want to double down on that, and I want to say that with regard to this issue, Murphy, Cuomo, Newsom, if it is even potentially true that they attempted to promote this image that their policies were successful, and the way that they did that was by fudging these numbers and doing a tremendous disservice to very vulnerable parts of the population. It is among the most egregious and sickening political, I don't even know what you want to call it. Like, I'm not even going to call it like a political move, because it's not a move. You're dealing with a serious disease. You are dealing with people's lives. You are dealing with family members and legitimate tragedy. And if you somehow, some way, and I'm not alleging this, I'm just speaking in an incredible hypothetical, but if those were directives, or if those were decisions that were made to promote a certain image, to promote a certain kind of policy, we have a really big issue. We have a really, really big issue, and there needs to be a severe degree of accountability against those people.
Right. Well, I'm seeing, in the articles that are reported, you're seeing people that like congressmen and women that are coming out and saying like this should be further investigated and further looked into. And Murphy has changed his tune a little bit too. But like, I want the Attorney General of New Jersey to find the people responsible for these actions and prosecute them, not just Merrick Garland. Okay, this happened in New Jersey. These were New Jerseyans that were doing it to other New Jerseyans. Okay, you fired them. No, I don't want them fired. I want them prosecuted. Why are we sitting on our hands? We admitted wrongdoing when we fired them, no?
These are great points.
But we'll see as the story continues to develop. But we do have a couple other stories to get to, Steve. What do you got?
Yeah. Oh, so I think that this is we're gonna. I think I'm making the right pivot here. If not, we'll get to the other one, whichever way. Brief news, I guess, but as we know, a few weeks ago, the Lieutenant Governor of New Jersey, Sheila Oliver, had passed away tragically. So in the interim, we've been operating without a lieutenant governor, which I didn't know this. The construct of a lieutenant governor in the state of New Jersey is quite new. There have only been two people to hold the position: Kim Guadagno under Christie and Sheila Oliver under Murphy. But it looks like tomorrow we will be hearing officially who the third person to assume to the position of Lieutenant Governor of New Jersey is, and it's going to be Tahesha Way, who is currently the New Jersey Secretary of State. So it seems that this is the way things are going to go. Tahesha Way, she's 53 years old, Democrat, former Passaic County freeholder, and she is one of the OG members of Phil Murphy's cabinet the first time he ran prior to his reelection. So she's been involved with this administration from the very beginning. And I know there was some confusion a few episodes ago where I thought we met Sheila Oliver at the event, but we actually met Tahesha Way. So as far as I'm concerned, this is seems to be a very reasonable pick and, next in line, so to say, for the position. So I think it's just worth saying, again, very tragic that we had the loss of our lieutenant governor, but the best of luck and best of wishes to Tahesha Way as she assumes that position, a little bit of a change of duty. And I guess it leaves the question open now. If she's assuming the lieutenant governorship, who is New Jersey's Secretary of State? So it seems like there's a lot of draft board style picks going around, a lot of moving around positions and places. So we'll see who ends up filling that position. But at least for now, moving forward, New Jersey is set to have a new lieutenant governor in Tahesha Way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair, and it seems to be like a logical step up from the Secretary of State to lieutenant governor position, and so I'm not going to say one way or the other of whether this is a great pick or a bad pick. I don't have anything to say about that. I think that it's a logical pick and it makes the most sense. Now, I did have a little bit of an issue that when asked about it, New Jersey's governor, Phil Murphy, said that the most important thing and quote unquote center stage in everything we do is diversity. And so why even say that? Because now people are going to say it's a diversity hire. Just say I'm picking the best person for the job, and it happens to be your Secretary of State, and then there's no question about, the only reason you pick them is for the diversity of the candidate. What do you if you want people to stop claiming things like that are an issue, then don't give them the opportunity to do so. When residents of New Jersey were asked about it, a vast majority said they didn't care if Murphy picked a woman. They didn't care if Murphy picked a person of color. They just pick somebody who you think is going to do a good job. And I think he did that. I do. I think that he probably works well with Lieutenant Governor Way, or soon to be Lieutenant Governor Way. And I'm not claiming that it is. But my problem is when these politicians say that and then you don't expect people to bring it up.
You know what I think is a fair thing to mention on this point, because I agree with you. I think also, if I was Tahesha Way, personally, I would be a little upset. I think she has a record, and I'm reading this now. She's a graduate of Brown University. She went to University of Virginia Law School. She was administrative law judge. She is, like I said, a former Passaic County freeholder. She was the first Black person to lead the National Association of the Secretaries of State. So this is a very accomplished woman. She has put in her dues, put in the work, and climbed, the successive ladder in the way that she so desired to ultimately reach positions of incredible power that I think require incredible determination and intellect. And for the governor to reduce her to or claim that, a big part of his decision was her diversity. I understand that's a big part of her identity. I understand that is important and material to her experiences, how she got here, X, Y, and Z. but I would want the credit where the credit is due. I would want to be chosen because of my work ethic, my ability to deliver results, and my ability to serve in the capacity that you're asking me to serve. So I think, just to bounce off of your point, double down on it. Tahisha Way is incredibly qualified for this position. Not that either of us said she wasn't, but I think that's something that Phil Murphy maybe should have leaned into, as opposed to saying that diversity's front and center on this decision.
Right? No, absolutely. That's exactly the point that should be driven home here. This is somebody who's qualified for the position. She has the background. She worked in the administration and she earned the position. I'm sure of it. Make that the center point. That's like, it doesn't seem to be politically advantageous to do anything other than that, especially when polling comes out and that shows that voters don't care. Who are you trying to impress? You're trying to give yourself, as a white guy, a pat on the back. It's like, no, pick the best person for the job at the end of the day. If it's Tahisha Way, which it seems to be, great, wonderful. I'm very happy. But
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
And so congratulations to Tahisha Way. She deserves it. She worked very hard for it. She has all of the qualifications for it, and I hope she does a terrific job, because if she does well, New Jersey does well, and that's what really matters.
Truth. So, a bit of an abrupt, it's completely change of tone on our final story here, but worth mentioning. I think it's a definitely scary situation involving New Jersey, somebody like tangentially involved in New Jersey, but I think important to talk about nonetheless. So this news broke this morning. However, in my reading, I've learned that it's been happening for a few days at this point. Individual by the name of Mark Dickey, who is from originally Croton-on-Hudson in New York, which is a very bizarre hyphenated name for a town or city or whatever it is. But he's a volunteer, and I believe the president of a Sussex County based, we're going to call it like a rescue initiative that deals with, like I said, like search and rescue missions. Oh, basically this guy was exploring a cave out in Turkey. He's a caver, as they are so called. And he is, I believe at this point, about 2/3 of a mile, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,400 feet underneath the earth in Turkey. And he is suffering from an illness down there. It's not too certain about what it is, but he's allegedly dealing with some intense bleeding, vomiting. It seems to be intestinal in its nature. And so there's a massive recovery effort underway in Turkey, happening right now as we speak, to get him safely out of this cave, return him home. And it's become more complicated because his condition has deteriorated to a point where he needs to be taken out on a stretcher. And officials in Turkey who are familiar with this cave have claimed that it takes about 15 years with perfect conditions, and like everything goes exactly as it should, no bumps, no bruises, to get from where he is in the cave to the surface. So they very clearly have a tremendous task before them to get him out safely with use of a stretcher, which is going to complicate things. They were talking about having to make adjustments to the cave, I imagine, with some sort of excavation tools to widen it in certain parts to be able to get him out safely. I know that they've been distributing proper medical gear and support down there. There was reports that they had even transferred a few liters of blood down there just to make sure that, in the event that he is losing vital bodily fluids, that he has the tools necessary to continue to survive. So I want to say right now, the world is, has their eyes turned to Turkey and wishing for a safe recovery for Mark Dickey so he can get back to, doing what he does, which is exploring these caves and being on the other end of things, being the rescuer, being the example, being the guy that goes in and gets these people out. So,
Yeah, I think that's fair. Obviously, prayers and thoughts to him to get out safely. And I think that also, it goes to show the first responders and the people that put themselves in harm's way all of the time. Like, these are dangerous things that they do. And even the most experienced person can find themselves in a predicament like this. So, um, obviously we hope for a speedy recovery, but I think it's just important to note how dangerous certain things are, especially when you're dealing with unknowns, like going into a cave or going into, the woods even, or playing with fire, stuff like that. Things can happen that even the most experienced person gets caught up and gets trapped in. So be careful with what you're doing with things like that. Make sure that you are doing things the right way and as smartly as you can, so that you don't find yourselves in predicaments like this, and hopefully everything turns out okay for him. But like, it goes to show that even as experienced as I'm sure he is, you never know what's going to happen when you're dealing with nature.
Yeah, and so I want to throw some more details at you just so we have more context. There's actually been a GoFundMe created to assist in these rescue efforts because the region where he actually is going through this cave is quite remote. The Turkish military is involved trying to send water and some resources out there because that's how remote this location actually is. And, Mark actually hopped on a video on Thursday, so today, where he was speaking from inside the cave, just expressing thanks, gratitude to all of the efforts that are being made to, A, keep him healthy while he awaits rescue, and then B, ultimately, when he gets rescued. So, like you said, it is a harsh reality, but a reality nonetheless that, even the most experienced people, sometimes you just cannot control certain circumstances. And I think the ability and one of the great hallmarks of humanity is that in moments like this where somebody needs help, we can always come together. We can always, form that tribe that is going to get somebody out of a really tough, unpredictable situation. So hats off to all the rescuers that are putting in tremendous hours, work, the Turkish military, anybody that is, donated it, like all of the efforts, to save one man, who's probably saved so many others, is just it's heartwarming, and I think it's a great show of compassion and humanity. So, best of luck, best wishes. Hope that everything goes swimmingly, and this is a story that we can obviously keep tabs on because he is going to come up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. So with that though, we'll be wrapping up this episode of Bridging the Gap. Unless Steve, you have anything else you wanna hit on, but if not, um, thoughts and prayers over to him in Turkey. And with that, I'm AJ Malillo,
I'm Stephen Romola.
and we hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.